Right now, in the Fraser River near Maple Ridge, British Columbia, a large concrete vessel lies capsized and partially submerged. It's slowly deteriorating in plain sight. It's not a cargo ship, and it's not an old ferry. This structure is what remains of the McDonald's McBarge, a floating McDonald's restaurant built for Expo 86. In March 2025, the structure was found listing sharply before sinking in place, according to Transport Canada and confirmed by CBC News. What was once a carefully engineered attraction is now officially classified as a derelict vessel. That outcome is difficult to reconcile with what the McBarge once represented. When it launched in the mid-1980s, it was designed to project modernity, innovation, and corporate confidence. McDonald's wasn't just selling burgers, they were also selling a vision of the future. A floating restaurant built with marine-grade concrete, designed to feel upscale, efficient, and technologically advanced. At the time, it worked. Visitors lined up and cameras flashed. The McBarge became one of Expo 86's most talked about attractions.
Remember McBarge? The year was 1986, and that's what people fondly called the McDonald's restaurant anchored in False Creek.
Nearly 40 years later, that same structure has become something else entirely, no longer a symbol of progress. The McBarge now stands as a visual reminder of abandonment. It spent decades unused, shuffled between locations, owners, and unrealized redevelopment plans. Each attempt to revive it stalled, not because the structure failed, but because no one could clearly decide who was responsible for it or what rules it was supposed to follow. So how did a multi-million-dollar engineering masterpiece end up rotting in a river? It wasn't a storm that killed the McBarge. It was something far more mundane and far more destructive. It was bureaucracy. This is the story of what happens when specialized maritime engineering collides with rigid land-based zoning laws, and how a symbol of innovation slowly became a liability no one wanted to claim.
What good is it?
Yeah.
Tell me. Nothing. It's useless. It's an eyesore.
Put it to good use.
But long before it became a liability, the McBarge was an undeniable star of a global spectacle. Expo 86 in Vancouver wasn't just a world's fair, it was a global stage. Corporations knew they couldn't just advertise here, they had to impress, and McDonald's took that challenge seriously.
With the participation from over 50 countries and millions of visitors, Expo 86 left an enduring legacy, reshaping Vancouver's infrastructure, economy, and international reputation.
By the mid-80s, the company reportedly dropped about 12 million Canadian dollars on their expo presence. But here's the kicker. Roughly 8 million of that went into a single project. That's the floating McDonald's restaurant that we would come to know as the McBarge. So if you adjust for inflation, that investment sits at over 25 million Canadian dollars today. This wasn't a side attraction. It was a massive statement. At the time, McDonald's was already one of the most recognizable brands in the world. But Expo 86 wasn't about being familiar. It was about the future. Visitors showed up expecting sleek designs, ambitious engineering, and experiences that felt ahead of their time, and the McBarge was built to deliver exactly that. Sitting out on False Creek, it stood apart from the traditional pavilions, both literally and symbolically. A floating restaurant wasn't just unusual, it was a signal that screamed confidence, innovation, and adaptability. But what really surprised people was how different it felt once you stepped inside. This wasn't the regular McDonald's most people knew. You didn't see molded plastic booths or those bright primary colors everywhere. Instead, the design was deliberately upscale. They replaced tile with hardwood flooring. The seating used wine-colored upholstery instead of hard plastic. The lighting was softer and more atmospheric. Giant windows gave you panoramic views of the water, reinforcing the idea that this was a place to actually sit and enjoy, not just rush through. They were targeting young urban professionals, that specific yuppie demographic that defined 1980s aspirational culture. The message was clear. McDonald's could be modern, refined, and socially relevant. The design was a sharp departure from the company's usual efficiency aesthetic. The McBarge wasn't trying to move customers in and out as quickly as possible. It was trying to change how the brand was perceived, even if it was just for a little while. For a lot of the expo visitors, this version of McDonald's felt experimental. It was almost like a test run for a future that never fully arrived. That tension is a lot clearer in hindsight.
Wow. There's still a lot of intact pieces spread around, including the staircase, which is still pretty much completely as it was in the 80s.
The McBarge embodied something you could call reverse futurism. It was an attempt to imagine what the year 2000 would look like, but using the design language of the mid-1980s. The result wasn't timeless, it was deeply rooted in its era. Those rich colors, the polished surfaces, that blind optimism about technology all reflected a specific moment when corporations truly believed progress could be engineered, branded, and sustained forever.
At the back of the vessel, you'll see the onshore power cable.
and it's a massive aluminum wire,
Huh.
which comes right up through to here. These are all aluminum wire.
And during Expo 86, the illusion worked. The McBarge was popular. It was photographed constantly, and many people talked about it. It did exactly what it was designed to do. However, its success depended entirely on the temporary conditions of the expo itself. This included the crowds, the novelty, and the context. Once the fair ended, the spectacle lost its stage. And without that environment, the McBarge's ambitious design was left without a clear future.
People absolutely loved the restaurant, and collectively throughout all the other McDonald's restaurants in the expo, it was one of the most popular and profitable.
But even with that uncertain future looming, the vessel itself was an absolute beast of engineering. The McBarge wasn't built by just any architect. It was designed by Robert Allen Limited, one of Canada's most respected naval architecture and marine engineering firms right here in Vancouver. This was a firm with a serious legacy. Founded back in the late 1920s, they had spent nearly a century designing specialized vessels, everything from tugboats to ferries, and they maintained a massive focus on safety and structural integrity. For Expo 86, the McBarge's underlying structure was more than just a novelty. It was a serious piece of marine hardware. The vessel was officially built on a 187-foot or 57-meter barge that combined concrete and steel to balance durability with buoyancy. A barge of that size allowed for 2 full dining decks, indoor and outdoor seating, and a layout that could hold hundreds of customers at once. During peak expo hours, you were looking at around 1,400 people on board. This wasn't a flimsy floating kiosk. The hull had to be engineered to resist shifting tides, wave action, and the sheer weight of people and equipment on board. Marine architects like Robert Allen Limited specialize in designing hulls that stay stable even under heavy loads, and this barge was built to distribute that weight evenly so it wouldn't tip.
With an international reputation for innovative, successful designs, Robert Allen Limited is a leader in creating cost-efficient vessels in Canada's marine transportation industry.
Inside, the layout was totally unconventional for a McDonald's. The kitchen wasn't front and center like you'd see in a typical fast food joint. Instead, it was tucked away below deck in a compact industrial space. Food orders would be prepared out of sight and actually went up via conveyor belts to the serving counter. This design helped the dining areas maintain cleaner sightlines and a more refined aesthetic that really suited the expo setting. Despite its size and engineering pedigree, the McBarge was designed with portability in mind. McDonald's hoped it could be moved to new waterfront sites after Expo 86, making it more than a one-time attraction. It was supposed to become a mobile showcase for the brand. In theory, this meant that the barge could be towed by tugboats to different ports. Though the floating design allowed for the barge to operate in a new location following the exhibition, the McBarge never did. Instead, beginning in 1991, the now derelict structure sat anchored and empty in a bird inlet. It wasn't beside tourists or waterfront diners. Rather, it was wedged among industrial barges and an oil refinery. It remained there unused and increasingly out of place for nearly 25 years, until it was finally moved in December 2015 to Maple Ridge, British Columbia. The gap between concept and real-world logistics became known among enthusiasts as the portability paradox. It was a structure that could be moved physically, yet couldn't operate independently or integrate easily with existing facilities. On paper, the McBarge looked like a brilliant blend of marine engineering and brand spectacle. In practice, however, it was a floating structure without a practical legal home once its original purpose ended. When Expo 86 ended in October 1986, the McBarge's future was supposed to be just beginning. McDonald's originally planned to keep the floating restaurant operating, and the design even allowed for it to function in a new location after the fair. But as the fair closed and the crowds left, that plan quickly lost momentum. For the first 5 years after the exhibition ended, the McBarge stayed moored on the expo grounds. By 1991, however, the new owners of the site had different plans for False Creek. McDonald's was forced to remove the barge, and it was towed away to a less desirable spot in Bird Inlet, a working industrial waterway surrounded by shipping activity and an oil refinery. Once there, the floating restaurant began what would become over 2 decades of obsolescence. Anchored empty among industrial barges, it never reopened as a restaurant. Though the vessel could physically move, its floating design couldn't easily connect to the infrastructure a shoreline business requires. Additionally, redevelopment plans stalled as officials faced the reality of relocating such a large structure, securing approvals, and making it functional again. What seemed like a technical issue was really a regulatory one, and not a problem local authorities were expected to solve.
Because it is in federal waters, we have no ability to actually go out there and remove it ourselves. So there's a process, That's what I'm saying right now. That process needs to be better.
Over the years, various ideas emerged to repurpose the McBarge. Some proposed reopening it as a restaurant or pub in a new waterfront area. One loyal fan said, "I hope they turn the McBarge into a restaurant again. I'd like to see it relive its history and see hungry visitors again." Others suggested a marine museum or even a shelter, like this viewer who suggested someone should have bought it and turned it into a floating house. But sadly, none moved forward. Funding was uncertain, and finding a permanent mooring that met both marine and municipal regulations proved difficult. Any site would have needed to satisfy zoning laws, environmental rules, and local land use priorities at the same time.
This is unacceptable. As a municipality, as a province, as a country, it should not be that difficult to remove these hazards from our waters.
While each proposal faced different obstacles, the outcome was always the same. Cities were asked to weigh public safety, environmental impact, and community interest before taking responsibility for the structure. In several cases, officials questioned how the barge fit into long-term waterfront plans. They raised concerns about traffic, shoreline access, and marine navigation in already crowded waterways. As each year passed, the McBarge showed more signs of neglect. Weather, tide, and time took their toll. The once white exterior faded under wind and salt water. Graffiti and rust marked its sides. Few people visited or cared what happened next. What had once been a centerpiece of a World's Fair gradually became an eyesore, a conspicuous reminder of an idea that once shined but never found its place after the spotlight moved on. By the end of the 1990s, the McBarge had become less a restaurant with a future and more a drifting symbol of what happens when ambition meets real-world complexity. It remained in Bird Inlet, out of sight for most, waiting quietly for some plan large enough and practical enough to justify bringing it back to life. But the story didn't end there. In 1999, a new owner saw potential where others saw only decay. By the late 1990s, the McBarge was no longer a failed restaurant, just a dormant asset. In 1989, Howard Meakin bought it, seeing value not as a McDonald's, but as a base for a new waterfront attraction, Sturgeon's on the Fraser. The plan envisioned a mixed-use marina and restaurant complex that would finally anchor the barge. It drew interest but never advanced. Unfortunately, regulatory delays, financing hurdles, and approval uncertainty stalled the project, leaving the McBarge idle once again.
I'm a developer, and I built a number of restaurants for McDonald's in Western Canada. I knew of the barge. I knew that they had some issues with City of Vancouver with the barge and in Falls Creek, and so I offered to buy it from them.
It briefly reappeared in 2004 as a filming location for Blade Trinity. Its abandoned shell became the Night Stalker's lair. There was no restoration, just decay repurposed. For many viewers, this was the first time the McBarge was seen not as a restaurant, but as something eerie and forgotten. The image only hardened. As interest in abandoned places grew online, the McBarge became a fixture in urban exploration videos and short documentaries. Its rusted shell and stripped interior were repeatedly cataloged. These videos circulated widely on YouTube and social media, introducing the McBarge to a new audience that had never attended Expo 86. Meanwhile, online forums and comment sections filled up with personal memories of eating there as kids. One person wrote, "I remember eating here as a 12-year-old. My mother didn't understand why we were passing other locations to eat here." Another proudly said, "I ate at McBarge during Expo 86. I remember it well." At the same time, locals began debating what should be done with it. This steady stream of attention didn't turn the McBarge into a tourist attraction, but it did give it cultural relevance. In December 2015, Meakin made his boldest move yet, towing the McBarge to Maple Ridge for a proposed $4.5 million redevelopment into a deep ocean discovery center. For a moment, revival seemed possible. However, the refit never began, leaving the barge empty and increasingly vulnerable. By early 2025, the McBarge was no longer just abandoned. It was failing. After sitting largely untouched for nearly a decade in Maple Ridge, the structure showed visible signs of decline. The hull had not been meaningfully maintained, water intrusion had gone unaddressed, and no long-term stabilization work had been completed. Then, in March 2025, the inevitable happened. On March 26, 2025, the McBarge was discovered listing sharply in the Fraser River. Transport Canada later confirmed that the vessel had sunk in place. It didn't drift away or break free. It simply lost buoyancy and settled unevenly into the river, partially submerged. And this wasn't the result of a storm or collision. Reporting indicates the most likely causes were years of neglected maintenance, gradual water ingress, and structural stress on a vessel never designed to sit idle indefinitely without care. Over time, even reinforced marine concrete requires monitoring. Without it, small failures compound quietly until the structure can no longer support itself. Once the barge capsized, attention returned fast. However, solutions did not. Almost immediately, the McBarge fell into jurisdictional limbo. limbo. Multiple federal agencies became involved, including Transport Canada, the Canadian Coast Guard, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Each had partial authority, but none assumed full responsibility for removal because the ownership was unclear while liability was disputed. Moreover, the cost of recovery or dismantling, potentially millions of dollars, stalled decision-making. As of 2025 to 2026, no confirmed timeline for removal has been announced. The consequences extend beyond symbolism. According to Global News, the wrecked McBarge now blocks expansion plans for Dwelltech Industries, a modular housing manufacturer operating a floating factory nearby. The sunken structure occupies critical water space, preventing the company from growing its operations and creating additional jobs. What was once a showcase of innovation has become an obstacle to modern industry, both physically and economically.
The McBarge couldn't be any more in our way.
It's a McBarge blockade. John, Archie, and Joe wants to expand his business to the Maple Ridge waterfront, but the once proud floating junk food palace is now just junk, sunk on the bottom of the Fraser.
The situation grew even more uncertain with the death of Howard Meakin in April 2025. For more than 2 decades, Meakin had been the McBarge's primary owner and advocate. He was the person pushing redevelopment ideas, managing relocations, and keeping the vessel from being scrapped. With his passing, the McBarge lost its last consistent champion. Since then, no replacement vision has emerged, and no new ownership plan has been announced. The McBarge didn't disappear because it stopped working. It faded because it no longer fit anywhere. Once Expo 86 ended, every decision about what to do next became harder, slower, and easier to postpone. Over time, that postponement turned into neglect. The structure itself lasted far longer than anyone expected. What didn't last was the framework around it. This included clear ownership, practical approvals, and a realistic plan for how a floating structure could remain in public waters long term. Without those, even a well-built project has nowhere to go.
As McDonald's and the world around us get more generic and a little more bland, I think this lasting remnant of it is kind of a joyful little oddity of it all.
Today, the McBarge is stuck between options. Removing it costs money, saving it takes commitment, and leaving it alone only makes the problem bigger with time. So the question isn't whether the McBarge had potential. It did. The real question is what cities do when that potential runs out, and whether waiting long enough becomes a decision of its own.